Hi, boys and girls. It's time for this week's story, and it's called Peter to the Rescue. Well, sometimes there's things in life that kids just don't like. And this is one of those stories. Now, Angela, she had been thinking she really had a problem, but she didn't think it was her problem. She thought that it was her mom's or her dad's or now her new stepfather named Peter's problem. She didn't even think about that maybe it was something she should talk to God about. Remember, we've talked about whenever you have a problem, go to God. He can help with all sorts of things. Well, she and her mom now lived in a house together, and her mother and father had gotten a divorce. And Angela was upset. She felt like nobody had asked her whether what she wanted, and it wasn't that her mother hadn't talked to her about it. She'd explained that her mom and her father both still loved her very much. That was never going to change. But they just had too many differences, she said. And so now a divorce had happened, and Mom had met a gentleman at church. His name was Peter. Angela, she was just kind of disgusted. Her mother hadn't asked her what she thought. Her mother had told her, well, he's a good man. His wife had died, and he didn't have any children. And he was kind to Mom. And actually, he was pleasant and nice to Angela as well. But Angela, he was tall and skinny, and he had a bald spot on the top of his head. And she thought, he's a whimp. Well, I think the other thing was that she felt that a girl should only have one dad. And her dad, he was tall and well-built and handsome, and he was an adventuresome fellow. But her mom and Peter had decided to get married, and when the wedding was all over, they said, we, not just them, we are going to go on a honeymoon. It'll be our honeymoon, Peter, Mom, and Angela. And Mom said that they were going to go to Disney World. Not a usual destination for a honeymoon, but Angela knew that that place had been chosen because of her. And she thought, well, going to Disney World would be fun. Well, when they got there, now I told you a little bit about Angela's real father. Her father built multi-story buildings. And when they were building it, if you've ever seen a huge multi-story building, they're generally made out of big steel pieces that hook together that make the framework. And those people, those men that build those buildings, have to walk all on those little narrow pieces of steel or iron. There's nothing between them and all the way to the ground. But her dad always said, well, walking way up there makes you feel like a man, and it separates the men from the mice. And Angela thought about that. Well, when they got there, the one thing that Angela really wanted to ride on, Disney World is full of rides, was Space Mountain. Now, Space Mountain is a huge roller coaster that goes through a big mountain-shaped structure, and out and over and back and forth, and it's really, really high. Well, Angela went, "Come on, guys, let's go to Space Mountain." Well, she set off on a run, and Peter and Mom followed behind. And Angela said, "Come on, let's get on." And Peter said, "I don't like heights. 3 feet off the ground is far enough for me." And Angela thought, he really is a wimp. But she went for the ride on Space Mountain, and they really did have a good time there at Disney World. When they got back is kind of when the trouble started. Angela had a white, long-haired cat, and the cat's name was Roscoe. Well, he had some problems all of his own. One was that white hair flew out and attached itself to everything. The furniture had white hair on it. Her new stepdad, Peter, he worked in a bank, and she thought that that was kind of a wimpy thing to do. And he wore suits every day. Working in a bank is a good job. But Angela didn't know that. And of course, all that white hair off of Roscoe would go all over his dark suits. So he was forever picking white hair off of his clothes. And he kind of said, cats are kind of useless animals. Well, Angela, she loved Roscoe. He was a nuisance besides his hair. He liked to run away, and he didn't come when you called him unless he was hungry. But she loved him. He was part of the family. Well, one day, when Angela came home, Roscoe had been up to his bad antics again, and he had climbed up on the windowsill of her window, and she had the windows open because it was hot. And he'd taken his toenails and he'd grabbed onto the screen in her window, and he ripped a big hole in the screen on the window, and he couldn't resist. Out that hole he went and disappeared. Well, when Angela got home, she saw the hole, and she'd gone all over the house calling for Roscoe, and he wasn't there. And he wasn't outside, he wasn't in the yard, and she was looking everywhere. And then Peter came home from work. Now, it wasn't that Angela wasn't nice to Peter, she just didn't talk to him unless she had to, and she had her own little attitude about him. But Angela was really distressed that Roscoe was gone. And when Peter came home from work, he saw that she was worried, and she looked like she was about ready to cry. And Peter came up and he said, "What's wrong, Angela?" Angela said, "Roscoe's ran off, and I can't find him anywhere. He's just gone." Well, Peter stood there for a little bit and he said, "Well, then I guess we better go look for him." And they got outside, and he pointed one way. He said, "I'm going to go this way. You go that way. Maybe we can find him." Well, Angela, she went all the way around the block, and she didn't see Roscoe in any of the yards. She didn't see him in the street or on the sidewalk. And then she came back around to where the house was, and she looked in the yard, and in their side yard, there was a big, huge maple tree. And underneath the maple tree, there stood a ladder that went up into the leaves of the tree. And when Angela looked, she could see Peter's shiny work shoes on the very top rung of the ladder That's all she could see was his shoes and his wrinkly blue socks and part of his pinstripe suit pants. And she thought, what's he doing up the ladder? Well, while she was standing there, the ladder started to fall. And Angela saw it and she rushed over and she grabbed it and she straightened it up and she held on to it and she said, "Be careful, Peter." Well, Peter hadn't said anything. Angela just stood there holding on to that ladder. And then she heard Peter going, "Kitty, kitty, 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 come here, kitty." Well, Angela stayed there. And finally, Peter said, she could see him standing on his tiptoes on the top rung of that ladder. And she was amazed. Finally, he called down, "I've got him." Well, it took Peter a long time to get down that ladder with Angela holding on to it. And when he finally came down off the ladder, his face was as white as a sheet, and there was sweat dripping off his face all over his white shirt. And he didn't look good at all. He looked at Angela. He kind of waved with his hand, and then he ran around the side of the house. And Angela could hear him throwing up. And she thought, oh dear. Well, she had Roscoe now because he had given Roscoe to her. And she was holding him and she said, "Oh, you naughty kitty. You ran away again. You could have been killed." Angela was thinking of the neighbor dog, but she loved on him. She really liked Roscoe. Well, she could hear Peter throwing up over there, and she thought, this is not a good time to go thank him. So she took Roscoe in the house, and she went in her bedroom, and she shut all her windows tight. And she put Roscoe in there, and she shut the door. She said, "Now you stay in here." Well, he couldn't open the door, so it was fine. And when she went into the kitchen, Peter was coming in the back door. And he still didn't look very good. And he went over and he sat down at the kitchen table, kind of like he couldn't stand up anymore. And Angela was a little worried. You know, she realized she'd never really looked at Peter. She just had seen that little bald spot on top of his head, and he had kind of a funny laugh, and he had a crooked smile. But he was a nice man. And he didn't even like cats. And he'd rescued Roscoe. Well, she looked at him sitting there and she said, "Can I get you a glass of water?" So she ran over to the sink and she got him a glass of water. He had nodded his head yes. And he started to drink that water. And she went over to him and she said, "Why did you climb up the ladder?" And he said, "Seemed like the right thing to do. I was afraid the cat would get down and run away before you got back." And Angela persisted. She said, "But you're afraid of heights. You told me that." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm really afraid of heights." He said, "When I was a little kid, I climbed to the top of a tree and I fell out. And I was in the hospital for weeks. So I've always been afraid of heights since." She said, "But then why did you do it?" He said, "Well, I may not be big and strong and handsome and adventuresome like your dad is, but I take care of my family. And if there's something to do, I'm going to do it." And Angela thought about that. That was a really good answer. Angela said, you know, you don't even like cats. He said, yeah, but you like Roscoe, and I like you, so I figured I should go look for him because you like him. And Angela was amazed. For the first time, she thought, he cares about me. He cared about Roscoe. Well, I don't think she really knew how to thank him, but she turned to him and she said, well, from now on, things are going to be different here between you and me. And she said, the first thing I'm going to do, she walked over in the kitchen. Every kitchen, I think, has what we always called a junk drawer. She pulled the junk drawer out, and junk drawers have things like a screwdriver and tape and push pins and tacks and all kinds of things, you know, twist ties. And she pulled out a roll of masking tape and she said, this is how to get all those white hairs off your clothes. She wasn't about to tell Peter that she really didn't like those white hairs all over her clothes either, but she put up her hand and she took the tape and she wrapped it with the sticky side out all the way around her hand. And then she was going to go over and show him how to rub on his suit and all the hairs would stay on the stickum. Well, before she could do that, Peter reached over and he grabbed the roll of tape and he wrapped his hand up. Well, Angela had taken his suit coat off the back of the chair where he'd probably left it when he went out to look for the cat. She set it out on the table and she started to reach over with this hand that had the tape on it. She was gonna wipe her hand across it. Well, he didn't know where she was going with her hand. And so they both ended up going for the same part of the coat, and their hands stuck together. And Peter, he kind of laughed. He looked at it and he said, well, I think you and I are just gonna stick together. And Angela turned and she smiled at him. And the smile he gave her, she thought, it's a nice smile. And he kind of laughed and she thought, I kind of like that laugh. You know, boys and girls, sometimes in life, there's hard things that happen, like Angela having a stepdad. That kind of stuff is never fun. But it's easy to look at somebody and go, oh, they're not like the people I'm used to. They must be weird. Or like she said, she thought he was wimpy. He just had a different personality and a different build than her father had. And you know, at school, you guys, there are kids that are different than you. They may look different, they may dress different, they may talk different, they may play different than you do. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. You need to give them a chance. And you might find that they end up being your good friend. Like in Angela's case, her stepfather, she finally realized, was a good man and he cared about her. When you go back to school this fall, remember this story and be kind to each other. Look at them with your eyes wide open and you might find friends. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll talk to you again next week with another story. Good night now.